The Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will come to order. Good morning, everyone, and I want to welcome the members, the witnesses, and our guests in the audience for today's hearing. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the Congressman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher, and the Congressman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. We are here today to consider 4 legislative measures. H.R. 2031, the Colorado River Basin System Conservation Extension Act of 2025, sponsored by myself. H.R. 261, the Undersea Cable Protection Act of 2025, sponsored by Representative Carter of Georgia. H.R. 331, to amend the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act to clarify a provision relating to conveyances for aquifer recharge purposes, sponsored by Representative Fulcher of Idaho, and the WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act, sponsored by Representative Stansbury of New Mexico. I now recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. Again, I want to welcome everyone to the Committee on Natural Resources' first legislative hearing of the 119th Congress. There are several new faces at the subcommittee, and for those of you who don't know me, my name is Harriet Hageman, and I represent the great state of Wyoming. I am a litigator by trade and have spent my career challenging federal overreach, protecting water and property rights, exposing federal land and wildlife mismanagement, and fighting back against the unconstitutional and unlawful acts of unelected bureaucrats. I am very honored to serve as the chair for the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries. I also want to thank Congressman Bentz for his leadership of the subcommittee during the past 2 Congresses. Today, the subcommittee will consider 4 bills. 3 of these center on the Bureau of Reclamation's work in the West. First, we have H.R. 231, which I sponsored, and would reauthorize the Colorado River Basin System Conservation Pilot Program, or SCPP, through fiscal year 2026. Colorado River Basin is one of the most developed, regulated, and negotiated rivers in the United States and in our history. I know I've done a lot of work in that basin. It has numerous diversions, several major dams, and is managed through multiple compacts, laws, regulatory guidelines, contracts, court decisions, and decrees. The basin is also experiencing long-term drought conditions. While many actions have been taken to address drought in the basin, my legislation seeks to reauthorize a program that has demonstrated that voluntary, compensated water conservation projects can conserve water for Colorado River system storage to help mitigate the impacts of the drought. To be clear, this program is not and should not be viewed as a permanent solution to addressing the drought conditions in the basin. However, at this time, it is a tool that the Upper Basin states can use to reduce risk to test new innovative water management strategies. While we are not discussing broader Colorado River Basin issues today, I do want to say that this committee is committed to working with the Trump administration, the tribes, the 7 basin states, their congressional delegation, and stakeholders to find a post-2026 solution. Our second bill, H.R. 331, sponsored by Congressman Fulcher, clarifies the intent of the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act to ensure that the Bureau of Land Management understands that third parties, such as the Idaho Water Resources Board, who is testifying before us today, can utilize a right-of-way to transport water for aquifer recharge purposes. Our third reclamation bill is sponsored by Congresswoman Stansbury and would allow the Secretary of the Interior to reduce or waive cost share requirements for tribal governments under Reclamation's WaterSMART program. This program, which is already oversubscribed, helps fund infrastructure improvement projects such as canal lining or piping to conserve and use water more efficiently. Our fourth bill, H.R. 261, sponsored by Congressman Buddy Carter, would prevent the Secretary of Commerce from requiring additional permitting for fiber optic cable projects that go through a national marine sanctuary if they have already been authorized by a federal or state agency. Undersea networks are a major component of our global connectivity. Enhancing the security of these cables and promoting, rather than detouring, their deployment and maintenance will protect our national and economic security and ensure that we are connected to the rest of the world. Again, I want to take the time to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to a robust conversation. I now recognize Ranking Member Hoyle for her opening statement, and I want to say that I look forward to working with you during the 119th Congress as we move forward on these important issues.
Thank you, Chair Hageman. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, it's not afternoon, is it? It's morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to serve as Ranking Member of the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee, and I look forward to working with Chair Hageman on protecting America's natural resources. I also want to thank Chair Bentz for his service, and it just made sense that we'd have another Oregonian in leadership on this committee, as water is so critically important in the Pacific Northwest and in this country. Now, I want to be clear, climate change is having a profound impact on our natural world. We're seeing drought, weather changing from historic norms, leading to a strain on our environment, economy, and national security. The devastation in Los Angeles is just one example. Record high temperatures, dry vegetation, combined with intense winds is causing inconceivable amount of harm. Because of what we're facing as we keep breaking global temperature records, one of the most important things this committee can do is help local communities better manage and conserve their water resources. This is what the three water bills in this hearing today do. H.R. 231, the Colorado River Basin System Conservation Act, would reauthorize a system conservation pilot program to support voluntary water conservation projects to address drought impacts in the Upper Basin through 2026. I'm also really happy to see Representative Stansbury's WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act, which authorizes the Secretary of the Interior to reduce or waive the non-federal cost share requirements for tribes receiving WaterSMART grants, including on today's agenda. This legislation will help remove a financial barrier for tribes to increase drought and climate change resiliency. I hope we can work together to quickly advance this legislation and tribal water settlements through the committees to support tribes' access to reliable water sources. H.R. 331, the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act amendments, would make it harder for communities and tribes to have input on water management, while it allows third parties to use an existing Bureau of Land Management right-of-way, easement permit, or other authorization for aquifer recharge without further authorization from the Secretary. It also classifies this as not a major federal action, all but guaranteeing these aquifer recharge projects are exempt from NEPA review. I hope the bill's sponsor will work with us to address this concern. The one bill that we feel needs major changes is H.R. 261, the Undersea Cable Protection Act. First and foremost, we need to make sure the purposes of the national marine sanctuaries and the natural, cultural, and historical resources are considered when permits are approved. These areas are some of our most cherished ecosystems and help fuel thousands of small businesses nationwide, including the very robust and important commercial fishing industry in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. National marine sanctuaries are our nation's marine national parks. I recognize that fiber optic cables are less destructive than many other activities and necessary for our economy and national security, and I believe we can find a solution that we all agree on that balances the need for fiber optic cables and protecting and preserving our ocean ecosystems. We need to make the language less ambiguous and allow NOAA to continue to charge fair market rate and assess damages, if necessary, and protect NOAA's authority to carry out the National Marine Sanctuary Act. If we get it right, it will help ensure the build-out of critical infrastructure in America and protect the sanctuary resources that local economies and small businesses depend on. I look forward to fighting for the health and sustainability of our water, wildlife, and fisheries, and thank you to the witnesses for participating in today's hearing. I look forward to hearing from each of you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Ranking Member Huffman for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and congratulations to you and to Ranking Member Hoyle. I know the majority was eager to get us started with this first subcommittee hearing, and it is happening on a shorter timeline than is standard for regular order. Democrats agreed to this in the spirit of cooperation, but we do expect going forward that the majority will work with us on the traditional schedule, and the norms of the committee will continue to be honored. The majority's haste of putting this hearing together also means that there are no administration witnesses. None were invited, and that would have been non-negotiable for the majority over the past few years. I hope that, too, is not a new precedent. But with that, I am glad to see Representative Stansbury's WaterSMART for Tribes bill included today. This is a good bill. It's going to provide essential tools to help tribes compete for grants that improve water conservation and resiliency. I have significant concerns about one bill, H.R. 261, the Undersea Cable Protection Act. We have to make sure that our national marine sanctuaries, which are some of America's most cherished places, continue to be protected. And this bill prohibits NOAA from requiring an authorization for the installation, maintenance, or recovery of fiber optic cables in any national marine sanctuary if such an activity was previously authorized by any federal or state agency. That's really broad and sweeping. National Marine Sanctuaries Act drives a collaborative process for developing and designating these sanctuaries that encompass protection for ocean resources that ocean users, local communities, and tribes can all be proud of. They help support coastal economies in a big way, and I know because I've got a couple of these marine sanctuaries in my district. They generate $8 billion annually to local economies and support tens of thousands of jobs. Businesses include fishing, diving tourism, recreation, scientific research sectors, and most of that activity is driven by small businesses. Activities in these sanctuaries have to be compatible with the purpose of the sanctuary. Small businesses such as dive boat operators, recreational fishing guides, whale watching tours, all of these must make sure that their activities comply with the rules. But in this bill, House Republicans are making it clear that billion-dollar companies like Meta get a free pass from all the rules. This bill lets them ignore any assessment of the impacts of their activity on the marine sanctuary, such as whether the route will disturb its most vulnerable features like deep-sea corals, and it allows them to escape any fees or liability if a disaster occurs. And disasters do occur. In 2020, a Facebook subsidiary bungled a fiber optic laying operation off the coast of Oregon, leaving their drilling pipes, fluids, and other construction materials on the seafloor and creating 2 sinkholes. Why would we give billion-dollar tech bros, donors, and pals that have been exalted a little too much lately a free pass, knowing that our small businesses are playing by the rules and will be the ones to take the hit if a construction disaster occurs? That said, I think there's nothing inherently incompatible between undersea cables and national marine sanctuaries. They exist in a bunch of existing sanctuaries, including the ones in my district, but they don't need special statutory giveaways. And if a bill is needed, we need to be thoughtful and careful and targeted about the way we do that. So finally, H.R. 331. Which amends the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act to make it easier for third parties to use federal rights-of-way for aquifer recharge projects. The sponsors of this legislation have made progress to ensure that the bill complies with the directives of FLPMA, Federal Land Policy Management Act, and other key environmental laws, but it still contains an unnecessary NEPA exemption. And that is bad. It's going to make it difficult for tribes and affected communities to weigh in on projects that could significantly impact them. I hope the sponsors will work with us to fix that language and make sure this legislation doesn't place additional burdens on these local communities. And if they can do that, I think that's a bill that should have broad bipartisan support. With that, I want to thank the witnesses, welcome everyone to Washington, and I look forward to discussing these bills further. Yield back.
Thank you. I will now introduce our first panel, and as is typical with legislative hearings, the bill sponsors are recognized for 5 minutes each to discuss their bills. To testify on my own bill, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I think it's important to give a bit of background related to H.R. 231. The Colorado River Basin covers 7 states: Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. In fact, Wyoming is the headwaters with the Green River. It also covers the Republic of Mexico. In the U.S., the basin provides water for irrigation of nearly 4.5 million acres of land, municipal water supply to about 40 million people, and it supports hydropower facilities that can generate more than 4,200 megawatts of electricity. Within the basin, there are 7 national wildlife refuges and 11 national park service units. In 2014, the Bureau of Reclamation, the River Basin states, and the river water users explored ideas that could mitigate the impacts of the ongoing drought in the basin. One idea was the System Conservation Pilot Program, or SCPP, a 4-year pilot program designed to explore solutions to address declining water levels in Lake Mead and Lake Powell and the potential for long-term drought in the upper Colorado River Basin. The program implemented and tested on-the-ground voluntary water conservation opportunities that may help manage ongoing record drought conditions in the basin. The SCPP originally concluded in 2018. From 2015 to 2017, the Upper Basin SCPP funded 45 projects for a consumptive use reduction of approximately 22,000 acre-feet at a total cost of $4.5 million. In 2022, this program was reauthorized until September 30th, 2024. H.R. 231 would extend the program's funding authorization until September 30th, 2026, and require the Secretary of Interior to report to Congress on the continued effectiveness of the program by September 30th, 2027. The SCPP allows the Secretary to provide grants to public entities for water conservation pilot projects if the entity uses water from the Colorado River Basin for municipal purposes, and for new water conservation agreements, or for renewing or implementing water conservation agreements. This is a good bill, and I urge its passage. The chair now recognizes Congresswoman Stansbury for 5 minutes.
All right, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chairwoman and Madam Ranking Member. It's wonderful to be here with you today, and I'm excited to serve on this committee, having worked on water much of my life and my career, but also because we have great leadership, and I know, Madam Chairwoman, you have a long history working on land and water issues, as do you, Representative Hoyle, so thank you so much. I am delighted and honored to have the opportunity to present the bill that we have in front of you here today. It's called the WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act. I'd like to welcome Mr. Witherspoon. Thank you so much for traveling all the way from Window Rock, Arizona, the Navajo Nation, and I know our other guests who are testifying who've traveled from all over the West. Thank you for being here today. As we say in New Mexico, water is life. Water is sacred. Water is essential to everything we do, and yet for many tribal communities, access to water, infrastructure, and funding needed to maintain that infrastructure is out of reach. In fact, across the Navajo Nation, it is estimated that 30 to 40% of Diné homes do not have access to running water, piped water inside their homes. For example, in the Tohajale chapter, which used to be in my district, but is a community near and dear to my heart, near to Albuquerque, the people of Tohajale have lived for many years without safe drinking water. Thankfully, the issues around water are finally being addressed. However, there are still many homes that have to haul water from miles away that is used in homes, public buildings, and even across public buildings. This is sadly a common story across many communities. We have pueblos across New Mexico that have long gone without sufficient funding to address water infrastructure needs, not only for drinking water, but also for irrigation and other needs. As much of the West continues to face drought conditions and changes in water supply, it is unconscionable that we have not summoned the moral courage and the political will to address these issues. That is why this WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act is crucial. Years of underinvestment in tribal water infrastructure have impacted the ability of our tribes and pueblos to address water needs. It is estimated that nationwide, almost half of tribal homes lack access to adequate water or sanitation, and tribal communities are 19 times more likely to not have access to clean water overall. Make no mistake, tribes and pueblos have lived on these lands for countless generations since time immemorial, practicing both traditional cultural ways of life and resource stewardship, as well as economic activities. But as communities have grown, infrastructure has aged, drought and water security have intensified, the need to address water security has grown more acute. This WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act is one tool to unlock critically needed resources to address tribal water security. For over a decade, the Department of the Interior's WaterSMART program has provided hundreds of grants to communities across the West as one of the nation's premier water conservation programs. Yet tribes have received fewer than 5% of these grants due to burdensome cost-sharing requirements, which have acted as a significant barrier to accessing funds. This bill would authorize the Secretary of Interior to remove those barriers and would unlock millions of dollars in investment in tribal water programs and projects. This includes projects for addressing drought, water conservation, efficiency, reuse, and recycling. Water is fundamental to the social, economic, and cultural needs of Indigenous communities. This legislation will help to break down economic barriers to addressing those needs and will help to unlock the funds to support tribal communities in building out infrastructure. The time to address these issues is now, and I thank the chair and ranking member for including this bill in today's hearing, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Stansbury, for your testimony today. We do have several members who are also participating in other hearings on the Capitol today. So they will be coming in and out, and as the bill sponsors arrive, we will have them make their statement at that time. But to move forward with this and make sure that we're staying on time, we'll go ahead and introduce the second panel that will be testifying today. Mr. Nathan Thane, owner of Thane Farms in Green River, Utah. Ms. Denise Toombs, advisor to the International Connectivity Coalition in San Francisco, California. Mr. Dwight Witherspoon, water rights unit attorney for the Navajo Nation in Window Rock, Arizona. I was just with your president a few days ago. It was wonderful to have an opportunity to meet him again. And Mr. Wesley Hipke, Water Projects Section Manager of the Idaho Department of Water Resources in Boise, Idaho. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the button on the microphone, and we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. And at the end of the 5 minutes, the light will turn red. And I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before member questioning. I now recognize Mr. Thane for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Hageman and Ranking Member and other members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Nathan Thane. I am a fourth-generation farmer from Green River, Utah. My great-grandfather started farming in the 1880s. We lived along the Price River and moved in the late 70s to the Green River in central South Utah because there was a lot more water there. My father, who sits behind me, 85 years old, hollowed out a corn barn to play pickleball. He's a very active part of our family operation. I also have 2 sons who are working with me on the farm and plan to continue our heritage of producing corn, alfalfa, and melons. I'm here today to testify in favor of H.R. 231, legislation that would reauthorize the System Conservation Pilot Program. As committee members know, the Upper Colorado River System Conservation, or SCPP, is an important opportunity for temporary, voluntary, and compensated reduction in consumptive use of agricultural water in the Upper Colorado River Basin. Projects typically involve full or partial season fallowing, where farmers forego irrigation. It's also used for forbearing and the use of excess reservoir water shares. Participants are compensated per acre foot of conserved water to replace income lost by not using their water for its typical purpose. Our family farm operates about 1,600 acres of river bottom and bench along the east side of the Green River, above the little town of Green River, Utah. Our best money crop is corn, followed by melons and alfalfa. We produce products. We end up putting milk, beef, and melons on the tables of American families throughout, especially our region. Over the years, we've spent a lot of money investing in infrastructure. We went from flood irrigation on that acreage to pivots and sprinkler irrigation to conserve and to use water more efficiently. We were introduced to the SCC program in '23 as we had fields that had some poor drainage. We used this as an opportunity to do projects to help those fields drain better. And then in 2024, we did a much larger conservation project. If you know anything about farming, it's a lot like gambling. You spend a lot of money up front in seed and fertilizer and machinery and other things, and hope that you have a good market after you finished your crop with all the vulnerabilities that apply, weather and whatnot, and get your money back and turn a profit. The SCPP has introduced us to the idea that we can conserve water, leave it in the river, generate a better financial return by putting it on less productive ground or restore the productivity of fields where we have pulled water out to help with soil health, drainage issues, and nutrient management. We haven't traditionally used fallowing, as there's very little incentive to do so. You put a lot of money into having your fields in use and the water in use. The lose it or use it laws, in addition to the economic hit that you'd take by not using your water. So this is kind of the first stab at thinking seriously about conservation and all the benefits that could be put with it. We are learning that our water can be viewed as another type of cash crop that would allow us to implement a type of rotational fallowing, which could be very beneficial to our operations. The SCC program has opened our eyes to the fact that water we are saving and leaving in the river is benefiting Utah, and also meeting our obligations there and allowing water to be put in Lake Powell, Lake Mead, downstream. In summary, the users of the SCPP appreciate your support of this program. It's working. It's changed our minds. It's changed some of the attitudes that we have towards conservation and the opportunities that it provides. And it's also helping our state and our downstream neighbors and providing a little extra water for the fish and the environment. We have no interest in selling out. We love what we do. My kids go to classrooms where there's 4 kids that graduate, and they love it, and they want to come back. They like the rural area and the setting. I encourage you the committee to pass H.R. 231 quickly to ensure the program is reauthorized. The SCP is an important tool for farmers. At the same time, I would encourage the committee to work with states and farmers like me to make ways of making it even better, designing more flexible, long-term policies that would provide water users with the tools needed to conserve energy. Our farm alone has allowed over 2,000 acre-feet of water to return to the reservoirs, and we look forward to working and striving to conserve even more. I thank the chair and the other members for this committee for this opportunity, and if there's any questions, I'd be glad to take a stab at them.
Mr. Thane, thank you for your very helpful and informative testimony. I see that we have now been joined by Congressman Carter, and I'm going to have him testify about his bill for 5 minutes, and then we will come back to the panel. So, Mr. Carter?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak about H.R. 261. H.R. 261 is the Undersea Cable Protection Act. The reason I introduced this bill was to address a redundant process that's impeding the deployment of subsea cables. The Department of Homeland Security has designated the cables as critical infrastructure, and when you think about it, they are. We rely on these cables more than any of us realize because they're the backbone of the internet and are critical for intercontinental communication and transactions and are necessary to support the increased data loads that are a product of the growth in AI, supercomputing, and everyday dependency on the internet. If you don't hear anything else I say, listen to this. It's estimated that in the financial sector alone, undersea cables carry $10 trillion of financial transfers daily. $10 trillion of financial transfers daily. Anybody who's read the news in the past 6 months knows our adversaries have been targeting these cables and cutting them in order to cripple the economic and national security of countries around the world. This underscores the importance of redundancy and resiliency on our own cables and the diversity of routes that are needed to ensure we limit our own vulnerability to such activity. The permitting process for subsea cables is robust and goes above and beyond to protect the marine habitat that is particularly near and dear to the hearts of members like me who are from the coast. I represent the entire coast of Georgia, so it is important to me. The Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, state coastal commissions, and local agencies are all involved in a process that requires route planning coordination, multiple environmental reviews, and archaeological assessments to ensure the seabed floor and surrounding habitats are preserved and protected. I understand the importance of this process, and my bill does absolutely nothing to change that. What I'm looking to address is the additional special use permit process that prompts the secondary NEPA request, additional environmental reviews, and the delays that come with such a bureaucratic process in the instances where a submarine cable is being laid in a marine sanctuary. In some instances, the marine sanctuary came after the cables were laid, and they have to seek permission just to stay. The SUPs issued by NOAA are limited to 5 years, which is in stark contrast to the 25-year license they get from the FCC. It takes longer than 5 years to plan the laying of these cables, and as soon as you get your SUP, it's already time to start another environmental review. And we already know what the review will say, which is what they always say: subsea cables do not cause environmental harm. The investment to deploy these cables are significant and certainly expect a greater return on that investment than 5 years, and they deserve more regulatory certainty than this black box process. I'm told by folks in the subsea cable industry that marine sanctuaries are de facto no-go zones because of this regulatory uncertainty. And these sanctuaries are not just as rare as you may think. Over 400 miles of the coast of California is designated as a marine sanctuary. That's half the coast of the entire state, which also happens to be the most strategic place to lay subsea cables, given its position globally and its proximity to data centers. Limiting the ability to lay cables to less than half the coast of California and outside of sanctuaries throughout the United States limits the resiliency and the redundancy of these cables. This limitation increases the risk of external events like landslides, a ship dragging an anchor, fishing operations. These things do happen, intentionally or not. Would damage multiple cables at the same time and imperil our communications, which is detrimental to our national and economic security. NOAA has said that they are pausing the requirement for SUPs for these cables in marine sanctuaries for 2 years to determine a process going forward. However, the process will only address future marine sanctuaries, so the best case scenario is a patchwork of inconsistent rules depending on the sanctuary and when it is designated. My bill will provide regulatory certainty. You know businesses need that, regulatory certainty, now without jeopardizing any environmental concerns or responsibilities that have to be addressed before receiving a permit. This is a balanced approach to protect the marine environment while ensuring our national and economic security as well as our global leadership in technology. Once again, I want to repeat what I said earlier because I think it is very, very important. It's estimated that in the financial sector alone, undersea cables carry $10 trillion worth of financial transfers daily. This is important. Thank you very much for considering this, Madam Chair, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to address, and I yield back.
Thank you. Very interesting testimony, very helpful. And I assume, Ms. Toombs, that you will be reiterating some of the information he's provided and providing more detail about the importance of this bill. So would you please go ahead and begin your testimony for 5 minutes?
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the International Connectivity Coalition, ICC, regarding H.R. 261, the Undersea Cable Protection Act of 2025. This timely legislation is needed to address subsea cable permitting in national marine sanctuaries to ensure environmental concerns are addressed with direct consultation with NOAA while providing regulatory certainty for cable network investment and development in the national interest. I'm Denise Toombs, advisor to the ICC with 25 years of experience permitting subsea cables in the U.S. and globally. The ICC represents companies that design and operate submarine fiber optic cable networks, which are the backbone of global communications. These cables transmit 99% of intercontinental data, enabling essential global activities from commerce and financial transactions to secure government and military operations. A CSIS study estimates the subsea cable industry's substantial investment in these global networks contributes nearly $650 billion annually to the global economy and supports our national security. With exponential growth in global internet traffic and the demand from technologies like AI and supercomputing, the need for subsea cables continues to rise. In order for the U.S. to maintain global leadership in technology, investment and deployment in subsea cables needs regulatory certainty. The current framework for the permitting of subsea cables is already robust, requiring permits from multiple federal, state, and local agencies. Required studies, in general, this is not in marine sanctuaries per se, include essential fish habitat assessments, biological assessments, cultural and archaeological studies, and enforceable mitigation plans. Environmental impact studies and monitoring that are integral to these permitting processes and permit conditions continue to show that the environmental impact of cables is minimal and short-term. Environmental protection is managed in part through intensive routing analyses and engagement with resource agencies and local marine users during the design phase, established industry guidance and best management practices during installation, and cooperation with resource agencies during and after installation. The current permitting process can take up to 3 years before moving on to installation. The legislation being considered does not change or limit any of these requirements. What the bill is looking to address is the additional permitting framework for commercial subsea cables in national marine sanctuaries. Special use permits administered by NOAA add another layer of permitting and substantially increases the regulatory uncertainty for cable projects. NOAA's requirement for special use permits is redundant to the existing robust permitting processes already overseen by federal, state, and local authorities. Moreover, if an SUP is issued, it is only good for 5 years with uncertain prospects for renewal. A 5-year term is incompatible with critical infrastructure investment and expected operating life of these systems, and is in contrast with the 25-year license issued by the FCC for these cables and the 20 to 25-year terms of most state seabed leases. These restrictions discourage cable routes through sanctuaries, making them no-go zones, as mentioned. For example, approximately 400 of California's 800 miles of coastline is in areas designated as national marine sanctuaries. This matters because network resiliency and security require diverse cable routes. If networks are forced into more congested areas, they are more vulnerable to becoming a single point of failure during natural disasters or other events. The Undersea Cable Protection Act would streamline the permitting process by eliminating the extra requirement of NOAA's special use permits while retaining NOAA's oversight role through a consultation process. This would have no effect on the existing federal, state, and local regulatory requirements for subsea cables. The change would retain both the protection of sanctuary resources and the continued development of this critical infrastructure. Subsea cables are essential to the U.S. economy and national security, and this legislation represents a balanced approach to safeguarding our marine environments while enabling investment in vital communications networks. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Toombs. I now recognize Mr. Witherspoon for 5 minutes.
Yate, Chairman Hageman, Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify on the WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act. My name is Dwight Witherspoon, and I serve as an attorney for the Navajo Department of Justice. Today, I'm here on behalf of Navajo Nation President Dr. Boo Nygren to express our strong support for this legislation, which will make the WaterSMART grant program more accessible to tribes by allowing the flexibility with the non-federal cost share requirements. While this bill does not address the full scope of the Navajo Nation's water needs, it provides a useful tool to help the nation and other tribes address water infrastructure challenges and move towards a more sustainable future. The Navajo Nation water needs are immense and urgent. Our nation spans over 27,000 square miles across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, and many of our citizens live in remote areas without access to clean drinking water. At a rate that is more than roughly 30% of our Navajo households lack clean, reliable drinking water, a rate that is 67 times more than the national average. This stark statistic is not just a number. It represents thousands of families who are forced to haul water for drinking, cooking, and bathing. The lack of access to clean water has led to a cascade of public health challenges, including higher rates of waterborne illnesses and other preventable diseases. It also places an undue burden on women, children, and elders who are often asked to be able to haul the water for long distances. Unlike states and municipalities, the Navajo Nation does not have a traditional tax base. Since tribal lands are held in trust, it restricts our ability to generate revenue through property taxes, and our community's remoteness limits other economic development opportunities. As a result, we must rely on federal funding to build and maintain critical infrastructure. Programs like the WaterSMART are helpful, but the current and cost share requirements often put these funds out of reach for tribal nations who need them the most. The WaterSMART program has an opportunity to fund impactful projects for the Navajo Nation. For example, the nation could apply for drinking funding water system efficiency upgrades at the Alamo chapter, a satellite reservation in central New Mexico. The nation in the past has struggled to successfully apply for these funds simply because they cannot meet the non-federal matching requirements. The WaterSMART Access for Tribes would address this hardship by allowing the Secretary of the Interior to waive the non-federal cost share requirements, increasing the likelihood that tribes like the Navajo Nation will be able to access the critical funding. It is crucial to understand that while this WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act is a step forward, other larger investments in drinking water infrastructure are needed in Indian country. For instance, the nation continues to advance several water rights settlements before Congress. This would resolve the nation's outstanding water claims in Arizona and a majority of the claims in New Mexico, as well as address the massive infrastructure needs on the Navajo reservation. Access to water is not just a matter of infrastructure, it's a matter of health and economic opportunity. It impacts our children. Our schools struggle with inadequate water supplies. It affects our ability to attract business, create jobs, and perpetuate cycles of poverty. And it undermines our efforts to build sustainable future for the Navajo people. We urge this WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act recognize these realities and offers a practical, immediate solution to help address the barriers tribes face in accessing federal resources. By waiving or reducing the cost share requirements, this legislation would empower tribal nations to undertake projects to conserve water, improve efficiency, and enhance water delivery systems. We urge the subcommittee and Congress to support the WaterSMART Access for Tribes Act, while continuing to prioritize tribal water rights settlements. Together with these efforts, we can help turn the tide of water insecurity in Indian country, while honoring the federal government's trust responsibility for tribal nations. In closing, we want to thank the subcommittee and for its attention to our tribal needs. We look forward to you in advancing this legislation. We thank you for the opportunity to testify and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Witherspoon. The chair now recognizes Mr. Hipke for 5 minutes.
My name is Wesley Hipke, and I'm the Water Project Section Manager for the Idaho Department of Water Resources. I'm here today testifying on behalf of the Idaho Water Resource Board. The board's charged with formulating a comprehensive state water plan for conservation, development, management, and optimum use of Idaho's water resources, along with undertaking and financing projects and programs to help meet those needs. Idaho is a headwater state with significant water resources, but also includes vast semi-arid and arid regions where water supplies vary significantly from year to year. As with other western states, water supply shortages and water use conflicts occur across the state. Most notably is the eastern Snake River Plain in the southern portion of the state, home of 1/3 of Idaho's population. This plain is underlain by the Eastern Snake Plain Aquifer, or ESPA. This aquifer covers an area roughly the size of Lake Erie and supports about 1 million acres of irrigated farmland, municipal water supplies, and thousands of domestic wells for drinking water. The ESPA discharges spring flows into the Snake River, supplying water to an additional 600,000 of irrigated acres, many municipalities, hydropower generation, and a multitude of other uses. The value of goods and services produced by the ESPA region exceeds $10 billion annually. With the strong support of Governor Brad Little and the Idaho legislature, Idaho has made significant investments in water management, drought resiliency, expanding water supplies, and repairing and improving critical water resource infrastructure. Since 2019, more than $500 million has been appropriated by the legislature to the board for these water management improvements. The water levels in the ESPA are declining at an unsustainable rate. The Idaho Water Resource Board was tasked with the development of the ESPA Comprehensive Aquifer Management Plan to stabilize and recover this crucial aquifer. A key component of the plan is the development of a state-sponsored Aquifer Recharge Program. This program diverts excess surface water, including flood flows, in wet years to stabilize and recover this aquifer. To date, Idaho has invested approximately $60 million on recharge infrastructure. This does not include program operations or expenditures made by private parties. Development of the Aquifer Recharge Program includes the use of existing irrigation canals for the transportation and percolation of the water into the aquifer. A significant number of the irrigation canals cross lands owned by the U.S. Bureau of Land Management. These canals have existing right-of-ways with the BLM. Using this existing infrastructure is hugely beneficial for Idaho to reach its goals in stabilizing the aquifer. To ensure flexibility in managing aquifer recharge over federal lands, the 116th Congress enacted Section 1105 of the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act. In part, the act states, the holder of a right-of-way, easement, permit, or other authorization to transport water across public land administered by the Bureau of Land Management may transport water for aquifer recharge purposes without requiring additional authorization from the Secretary where the use does not expand or modify the operation of the right-of-way, easement, permit, or other authorization across public land. The act was intended to allow the board to move and infiltrate water for recharge through existing irrigation canals that cross BLM lands without obtaining additional right-of-ways. Despite the plain wording of the act, the BLM has taken the position that the act does not apply to third parties, only to the right-of-way owners of record. The interpretation requires the board to obtain new right-of-ways to conduct recharge in canals that already have existing right-of-ways. The BLM right-of-way process can be onerous and will add significant time to the development of recharge projects. This could severely delay the board's ability to reach the goals of recovering and stabilizing the ESPA. The BLM's insistent that the board obtain new right-of-ways to utilize existing irrigation canals for aquifer recharge is in contravention of the plain language of the act, and we believe is contrary to the intent of Congress in passing the act. The amendments to the act being sought in the legislature would address BLM's erroneous interpretation that the act does not apply to third parties. The amendment will enable the board to more efficiently implement its managed aquifer recharge activities and reach its goal for the benefit of the citizens of the state of Idaho. In conclusion, I want to thank this subcommittee for considering this amendment to the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act and for this opportunity to provide testimony. I would be happy to answer any questions the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hipke. I thank the witnesses for their testimony, and I will now recognize the members for 5 minutes each for questions. And I'm going to begin with myself. Mr. Thane, in your testimony, you talk about your own experience with the Upper Colorado River System Conservation Pilot Program. Given the current water challenges on that river and in that system, if this program were not to be reauthorized, how challenging would it be to access other federal opportunities?
Well, I don't know that I can speak exactly what it would. It is challenging in the economic terms of being able to conserve water. The infrastructure you have is we spend a lot of money to put down to utilize the water and efficiently do it. But as far as conservation, it's difficult to see much incentive to do so. I don't know that I can speak to how it would affect others. Certainly others that are used for conservation seems kind of counter to me to what we're trying to do to conserve water sometimes, although using water efficiently is definitely what we need to do. Utilizing it and wanting to utilizing it is the goal. With else you'll, the idea of they'll find somebody else for it, or the scarcity, they'll give it to somebody else who they feel is more. So I don't know that I can speak to how it would affect others' programs, but certainly conservation won't be as much on the table or any incentive to do it.
Well, this is definitely a program that's helped your operation.
Oh,
correct?
definitely. And there's a benefit to fallowing anyway, and that was known. But just the economic costs of following those conservation plans when there's such scarcity and such demand for it had little interest.
So at the end of your written testimony, you discussed the idea of Congress working on a more long-term solution to eventually replace the pilot program. Can you expound upon what that program would look like and how building more flexibility into a long-term solution would benefit farmers like you?
Well, I think one thing that we're tied to is the state has each of the Colorado Compact, how much they get. And having the states be able to show conservation and allow them to have that demand management gives, protects their water share. I think this program allows you to hold that in place, at the same time conserve water for downstream. The second part of your question.
So what I was curious about is whether you had any other ideas of how to build flexibility into the system for a long-term solution to benefit our farmers.
Yeah, as long as it's measurable and accountable and the water that we're using is efficient, I think it's going to be important that that's recognized in conjunction with the conservation efforts. I think everybody's worried they're going to take their water. I think there's a big concern that that's going to happen. So as long as farmers are doing their part, that they're offered protection and the flexibility to do it in a rotational program where you can see the benefits of it without the worry of the loss or the lack of access to it.
Well, thank you for that information. And Ms. Toombs, in your testimony, you mentioned that commercial undersea cables are important to national security. Could you please expand on how important these technologies are both domestically and globally?
Yes, certainly. As mentioned,
Please turn on your microphone.
apologize for that. Yes, certainly. As mentioned earlier, and I'll just reiterate it, submarine cables really provide the backbone of the internet. I I find that when I talk to people, they're surprised that that's actually where the internet comes from, if you want to call it that. They think it's satellite communications, and it really isn't. This is a submarine cable or a piece of a submarine cable, and they're just hiding in plain sight. And they do provide us with secure and fast communications domestically, intercontinentally, and globally.
So I'm going to go on to Mr. Hipke real quickly here. You state in your testimony that the BLM's implementation of the Aquifer Recharge Flexibility Act has made it harder to implement and manage aquifer activities in your area. How would Congressman Fulcher's legislation clarify existing law, and how would it help Idaho Water Resources, the Water Resources Board, more effectively manage its resources?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. To give you an idea, to get an easement in the past, it's taken me approximately 2 years, to do that. And for those that don't know, if you happen to see the news last summer, the ESP went through a curtailment or potential curtailment last spring, which was obviously a really big deal. That would have, if we had to move forward with that, would have curtailed a large portion of farmland. And the reason I bring that up is the recharge program's working, we just need to do more. And so every year that we don't have the capacity to do excess water, the aquifer is losing approximately, to get it in balance, we need to put in about 600,000 acre feet. And so currently the program's only doing about 250. On a really dry year, we can only do less than half of that. So we have to be prepared on those wet years to be able to put that water in the ground, and we don't know when those are gonna happen. So every year we don't have that in place presents a problem.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Huffman for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to start with Mr. Witherspoon. Mr. Witherspoon, thank you for your testimony, and you explained what I think is the heart of the question with Ms. Stansbury's bill, how the cost share requirements that we ask of state and local governments and other applicants may make a lot of sense in those contexts, but they're different for tribes. It's a significant burden, and I appreciate you explaining that. If we can get those cost share requirements waived so you can participate in the WaterSMART program, what are some of the specific things that you would be able to do? And I'm interested in the way that it might help you enhance drought resiliency planning and improve water management for communities that really are struggling.
Thank you for the question. The Navajo Nation has 110 communities, and each of those communities has water projects. And being able to approach the Navajo Nation Council as just one chapter to try to match the dollars needed to participate in the program is sometimes a very challenging obstacle, because you have, all the other 109 chapters that also have projects. So the limited amount of resources the nation receives each year through its generation of revenue, its trust fund, and the interest earned is generally directed, a good portion of that every year. And so there's a limited amount that can be directed towards roads or water or power or sewer. And so it's difficult to be able to do projects, just like, the United States has 50 states, each state has water projects, and would like to benefit from such. The Navajo Nation also has 110 chapters, and so just at $1 million, that's $110 million to come up with for water projects. And each chapter has water projects. So it's difficulty to get funds from council to try to make use of these programs. Thank you.
And I know that is going to be the same experience for a lot of the tribes in my district, so I appreciate your testimony there. I want to turn to you, Ms. Toombs, for your testimony, and I would like to better understand the goals of your coalition, the ICC, as you call it, with this legislation. And I certainly don't think that there's anything incompatible, as I said, with undersea telecommunication cables and national marine sanctuaries, but I do want to understand the context for this discussion. And so, do you know how many cables are present right now in national marine sanctuaries? NOAA tells me there's about 55. Does that sound about right to you?
Thank you for your question, by the way.
that about-
55 cables presently in national marine sanctuaries?
55 cables, including many telecommunication fiber optic cables, but 55 total cables in national marine sanctuaries is what NOAA says. Does that sound about right?
That sounds like more cables than I'm aware of.
Well, that would probably be good for you and me both to know, but that's what
Yes.
NOAA confirms.
Yes.
Do you know how many special use permit applications for fiber optic cables, including renewals, NOAA has denied in the past 25 years?
I do not know. I don't think there would be many, if any.
So few that it's zero,
Yes, that
according to NOAA.
sounds about right.
So no permit application has been denied by NOAA, and we're talking about something that's being called a no-go zone, where there are 55 existing undersea cables, including many of these telecommunication cables. So it seems that the act of obtaining a permit may not be the only issue at play here. Companies are apparently okay with going through all of the other state and federal permit processes. You've got to get permits from the Corps of Engineers
Absolutely.
and the state of California and so forth, which brings me to what I think may be the underlying issue here or objective, and that is fees and rent. Would you agree that this legislation blocks NOAA from collecting a fair market return for the use of these publicly owned resources?
Before I comment on that.
I just
before-
ask you to, it's a yes or no question. Do you agree that that's what the bill does?
One result would be to remove the fair market value requirement
Right, and in fact, on page,
associated with the SU.
and on page 10 of your presentation to this committee, dated January of this month, you state that that is one of your objectives, to avoid the imposition of annual fair market fees for a special use permit in national marine sanctuaries, correct? That is one of your objectives.
That would be one of the.
And
that
yet
would
you
be
pay
one of the
those
results.
fees for National Park Service rights of way and for BLM rights of way,
The
right?
gentleman's time has
I
expired.
yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Wahlberg for 5 minutes of questioning.
I thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the panel for being here, and I will restrict myself from regaling you all with fly fishing opportunities on a snake in the green. When you bring that up, all of a sudden my fly fishing hand starts to shake. And then you mentioned Lake Erie, which is in my district. We could talk about walleye fishing as well, but I won't do that. I want to focus my questions on the Undersea Cable Protection Act, introduced by my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Carter. I think we all agree that it's important for us to balance the environmental interest and national security and economic equities and our leadership technology when considering the permitting of these cables. And so, Ms. Toombs, as we've discussed today, you've had a lot of experience working on the permitting process, and that's the key issue, the permitting process and siting process, lengthy siting process for these undersea cables. One specific example in your home state of California is the Grover Beach Cable Landing Station. Can you share any background on this project and how it relates to the issues we're discussing today related to undersea cables?
Thank you for your question. Yes, at the Grover Beach Landing, I've actually permitted 4 cables, 3 in 2000, this was an earlier stage, and then 1 last year, again, all at Grover Beach. And I believe your question was just what's entailed in that, or
What's been your experience? Yeah.
My experience was that it is a very rigorous process, and the first round of cables, because this was early on, was a bit more arduous than than the later one, and the reason for that was that it was new, it was an unfamiliar type of project to agencies, and so we did a lot of studies, resulted in a lot of mitigations that have been carried through over the years, and I would say the experience more currently or more recently has been that industry has learned a lot over that time. The agencies have learned a lot over that time. And so now it's become a more predictable process. And so it actually was a process that was a little easier than it was the first time. But now those cables are in a newly designated sanctuary, and perhaps that's what you were getting at. So they were permitted before the sanctuary was designated.
Yeah, and I guess in these studies, have you seen any indication of subsea cables being harmful to the environment, to the way they are established?
No. I have permitted cables, many in the United States, globally, and we take a lot of care to put them in places that will not harm the environment, and there's a lot of monitoring and rigorous oversight. And we have not found, despite many follow-up surveys, many follow-up studies, that submarine cables have caused any harm to the environment.
Okay. Who at NOAA or otherwise in the permitting process is ensuring the national security and economic interests and the technology needs are also considered when permitting cables? Who at NOAA does this?
Pardon me?
Who at NOAA does this?
In my interactions with NOAA for permitting, that's really not part of the permitting process to consider those factors. We really focus on environmental protection and the environment.
Which are important factors. And I think that the
They are.
sponsor of the bill pointed that out. So it seems that there ought to be some consideration taken for that. I guess my final question to you, Ms. Toombs, can you talk about the national security implications of route diversification rather than effectively funneling the cables through one location?
Yes, I can. And one of the important factors about having diverse routes is so we don't have all the cables going into one location or, congested into a location because of damage that could be caused that could really make our global networks susceptible to or being vulnerable to losing our communications with the rest of the world, with financial
Sabotage.
sabotage could be one, but it could be intentional, it could be unintentional. So yes,
Unintentional, yeah.
either way, it's damaging to our security.
I appreciate it. I see my time has expired, and I thank the chair and yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Stansbury for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Witherspoon, thank you again for being here. I think one of the benefits of hearings like this is to help bring more information to us in Washington, D.C., and to those that may not be familiar with the context on the ground. And I was born in San Juan County and grew up partly in Farmington, New Mexico, and so and my mother worked for the Navajo Nation for a while, and drove and helped. She worked for Services for the Blind and helped people in very rural communities go shopping and things like that. And I think that one thing is really difficult for people who are not familiar with places like the rural areas and communities of the Navajo Nation is to understand that in the United States in the year 2025, there are communities across the largest tribal nation in the United States, 27,000 square miles. It's the size of Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire combined that still do not have electricity and running water. And that there are thousands of families, as you said, Mr. Witherspoon, that don't have piped water into their homes and they have to haul water. And I wonder if you could share for us here today, because I think it'd be helpful for people to understand what that looks like. What does it look like to have to haul water?
Thank you for the question. I've been able to do a number of presentations with my colleague at our chapters as well as at a number of college institutions. And one of the pictures that we display is two elders that are using a wheelbarrow, and they have to go about 1.5 miles, and they have jugs in their wheelbarrow to be able to haul water for themselves. And so for them to do that, and certainly they both have white hair, and it is certainly a challenge for them. I think it's Jean and Larry. But there's also cost for those that use vehicles. I think the cost for municipalities for 100 gallons of water is 20 to 40 cents, but it's about $13.30 for those that have to haul water. And so there's certainly an economic burden on certainly using the vehicles and travel and that type of cost. Thank you.
And I think that it's not just an economic cost, it's a psychological cost, it's a physical cost. You know, when you talk to families that have to haul water, and there's families even, like I was mentioning to Hajale, that, you know, people have to drive 20, 30, sometimes 100 miles to go fill up water tanks just to cook food, just to take a shower, just to have clean drinking water. Like, this is the year 2025. And there are thousands of families in the Navajo Nation that don't have piped water in their homes. And to the extent that the Navajo Nation is willing to have members of this committee visit, I think it would be very impactful, especially as we're working to try to get the water settlement that you all recently approved across the finish line. So I want to just make sure that, you know, when Mr. Witherspoon says that the needs of the Navajo Nation are immense and urgent, like, these are fundamental human rights issues. The fact that we have elderly members of these communities living in very rural areas that don't have piped water in their homes, it should not be a condition of modern life in the United States of the Navajo Nation. The WaterSMART program, as you mentioned, Mr. Witherspoon, is just one small tool, but it is an important tool in the arsenal of addressing the immense water infrastructure needs of our tribal communities. And I am hopeful that not only this particular bill, which will waive cost-sharing requirements for specific projects where there's high economic needs of communities, will pass, but that we can also advance the Navajo Nation's water settlement through Congress this year, as well as the other Pueblo settlements that we're trying to get across the finish line. Because I think that if the American people at large really understood what it looks like and what the psychological, spiritual, physical, and just life stress it is to not have adequate water infrastructure, I think that people would really be shocked. And so I'm grateful that you traveled here today to share your testimony, and grateful that the Navajo Nation is supporting this bill. And I want to thank you and the president and also the staff who are behind you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ezell for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I'm very excited to be here on the committee and working under your leadership and being with everybody on the 119th Congress. H.R. 261, the Undersea Cable Protection Act, is a crucially necessary bill. Our current undersea cable network connects every continent except Antarctica. These cables are imperative to maintaining our national security. While I believe in protecting our marine environments, finding the balance of doing so and protecting our national interest is paramount. This is especially true since we know these regulations already exist at our state and local levels. Unfortunately, special use permits and other burdensome requirements that are imposed on these cables have disrupted progress, which can ultimately lead to national security vulnerabilities. NOAA realized this and issued a notice to relieve some of these duplicative and costly regulations for 2 years. H.R. 261 would make permanent NOAA's decision to no longer require special use permits for telecommunications submarine cables in a marine sanctuary. It would also prohibit any other NOAA authorization for all existing and future cables within the boundaries of any marine sanctuary. Ms. Toombs, in your testimony, you note that the commercial undersea cables are subject to a robust permitting process. Could you expand on the number of agencies and permits at both the federal and state level that are involved in permitting process for undersea cables?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I can. In terms of the types of permits we need to obtain and how many, and again, I'm speaking of the U.S., at the federal level, there would be probably a minimum of 6 federal agencies that would need to be part of that process, whether through permits or through consultations. At the state level, of course, that will vary, from state to state, but I would say, probably at a minimum 4. Different resource agencies or land agencies would be involved in permitting these, and because it's not all underwater, they do land. There would be local agencies as well that, the local communities or planning departments would get involved, and that could be a handful of agencies or more, depending on the complexity of the landing. And if I may make a follow-up point to one of the earlier questions about NOAA not denying any SUPs, the reason for that is there probably haven't been any applications, and I can speak from experience that during the early phases of route development, site development for new projects, we've often advised that that pathway is too risky from a project standpoint or from a development standpoint, and so one of the reasons there haven't been any permit applications denied is that we haven't submitted any based on the risk.
And roughly how long does this take?
It's unclear. We don't really know because we haven't actually gone through the process in several years. I think made the point earlier that there haven't been any new cables permitted in marine sanctuary for about 20 years.
Okay.
So we don't honestly know how long.
So we really don't know. One criticism we might hear about H.R. 261 is that it somehow circumvents or undermines the existing permitting process. But you and I both know that this legislation simply removes one step, the special use permit, in a process that involves several layers of review. Can you talk about the difficulty the industry has faced in trying to navigate the special use permit process? And how will this legislation improve the permitting process for these projects?
Yes, and as I mentioned, because we haven't been applying for special use permits, it's hard to say how we would navigate it. That's been one of the reasons that we've avoided doing that, because it's an uncertain path. It adds uncertainty. And I'm sorry, the second half of your question.
No, that's all right. Let's move on just a minute. These projects can often be decades long and require extensive levels of investment. Would that be correct to say that?
Yes, that would be correct.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Hoyle for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Thane and your father for coming all the way out here. It really, really matters. I'm sure as a farmer, you have a lot of things to do at home. Coming to DC is quite a sacrifice, but it is important to hear about stewardship and conservation from people that are utilizing these practices on the ground, as opposed to people who hear about it or read about it from somewhere else. So I just wanted to thank you so much for being here. Secondly, I want to thank all the witnesses and Mr. Witherspoon for you. Would you care to share about the barriers the Navajo Nation has encountered when accessing or participating in WaterSMART programs, and how these challenges has impacted your water management efforts?
One of the challenges that the nation faces is capacity. In the Department of Water Resources, we have 4 individuals, hydrologists, and we have 110 communities that each have water projects. And so being able to apply sometimes for the federal water grant programs is a great undertaking. And so a lot of times they'll look at large regional projects to be able to address their time and capacity. There are chapters, and certainly chapters at a particular level, they have difficulty getting the expertise, certainly to apply, and then certainly trying to get that matching fund from the Navajo Nation government. So those are some of the challenges that are faced to be able to make access to these grant programs. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's important that Congress takes steps to address these challenges so that tribes can fully access these programs as they were intended. With that, Ms. Toombs, I want to thank you for your testimony, and then I'd like you to address incidents where subsea fiber optic cable installations went poorly and did result in environmental harm.
Thank you for your question. I've been involved in many projects, as I mentioned in my testimony, and I have not had any projects where I would say it resulted in environmental harm.
Okay, so clearly you were not involved with the Facebook undersea fiber optic cable off the coast of Oregon, just north of my district, which...
That is correct.
Yes. The Facebook subsidiary it created a mess off the Oregon coast when a drill bit broke and left 1,100 feet of 6-inch steel pipe, an 11-inch diameter drill tip, and 6,500 gallons of drilling fluid in the ocean. 2 sinkholes later formed along that cable's pathway, and then Facebook just left, did not tell anyone about it. It was found, and now we're working on addressing that issue. And so my question is, isn't it reasonable to ensure that companies continue to purchase general liability insurance, and if a disaster occurs, which again did occur just a couple of years ago off the Oregon coast, that they pay for natural resource damages and cleanup? And this is the current policy of the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. What is your position on that? My concern is that this bill would remove that liability protection, and that is very concerning.
Again, thank you for this question.
Sure.
And I do understand your concern. I should also mention that the technique used is in itself considered a mitigation. It's a requirement to use that technique in Oregon as well as California because it is considered to be more environmentally safe.
So I'm sorry, Ms. Toombs,
But-
because there's such a short time, but specifically to
On
the
the
liability
liability.
protection.
My
and
understanding
responsibility.
is that the National Marine Sanctuary Act still would retain the component or the section that has to do with liability for damages. My understanding is that is not part of the SUP.
Okay, thank you so much, and we'll just need to clarify that with the
I'd be happy
follow-up.
to clarify and
And
follow up.
Thank
Yes,
you so much.
of course.
I yield.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Crank for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very fortunate. I represent Colorado Springs, the home of United States Space Command. I also happen to serve on the House Armed Services Committee. And I will tell you, I had a briefing the other day from the commander of U.S. Space Command, and pretty much all we talked about was how China is looking at ways, particularly in space, to disrupt the U.S. economy, that they see that as economic warfare, that they could literally shut this country down by using their assets in space against U.S. assets. And I think this is a similar situation here with the cables. As the sponsor of the bill noted, $10 trillion daily go through those cables. I got to tell you, I think sometimes the Chinese Communist Party laughs at the debates probably that we have here, that we would not streamline a process here to make sure that our assets, our military assets particularly, or our economic assets aren't protected. This is a false choice that some people present, that it's either to protect our marine preserves or have national security. You don't have to choose between those two. We do both. We do it every single day. And I think that we will rue the day someday, looking back, if we ever do have the Chinese or another one of our adversaries use this against the United States. So I would suggest that. I mean, do you think that, Ms. Toombs, do you think that the current permitting timeline for undersea cables puts the U.S. in a vulnerable position?
Thank you for your question. I would say it's less the permitting timeline itself, but rather the uncertainty of it. It's not predictable, and especially, as I mentioned, it's been mentioned here, for critical infrastructure. I mean, a 5-year term on a permission is really not long enough for that type of investment, and so I would say that's really one of the deal killers on it, not just the timeline, but not knowing whether you can proceed on that timeline and have any assurance that you'll get a permit at the end.
Are these, is it so difficult right now that these marine preserves are there that if somebody's going to put cable, they don't bother going through them, so they go around them, therefore creating this pipeline where, you know, we have a vulnerability because they're all close together?
Yes, that's been one of the consequences of it, is that, again, because of the uncertainty, it's difficult to commit to any sort of an investment or capital project, infrastructure project, for that duration of time. And so it's to de-risk that, you go elsewhere.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And Madam Chair, I was happy to see that Western water remains a priority for this subcommittee. I know it would be with your leadership in the authorization and oversight plan. It's no secret that Western states have been facing a historic drought that's affected the water availability in the Colorado River. Programs have been introduced at the federal, state, and local levels to address these historic droughts and improve water conservation. And the Colorado River System Conservation Pilot Program, or SCCP, has funded numerous projects in Colorado to encourage voluntary water conservation. And I would just thank you, Madam Chair, for your continued focus on this. Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you. And the chair now recognizes Ms. Elfreth for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to our panelists for being here today. I think we can all appreciate the importance of certainly national security and our 21st century economy when it comes to these underwater cables. At the same time, government has gone through the trouble of designating these national marine sanctuaries for a number of reasons, including their fragility, their importance and impact on the broader ecosystem that surrounds them. Certainly, that's true in my home state of Maryland. And so I think this is a balance that we need to get right, and that's what I would like to hone in on today. It's also my understanding that groups such as kayak outfitters and stand-up paddleboard companies, when they are going into a national marine sanctuary now, certainly in Mallows Bay in my state in Maryland, they have to apply for a special use permit, and they have to pay a fee, recognizing the potential human impact on these sensitive and fragile areas. And so I'd like to hone in on where Ranking Member Huffman began, which is by circumventing the special use permit, this bill also circumvents the fee that goes to the direct management of these national marine sanctuaries. So can you tell me, Ms. Toombs, how much money the companies you represent would be saving by circumventing that fee process?
Thank you for your question. Really, the FMV, or the fair market value fee, is not part of what I do. Is this part of this permitting process? And as I mentioned, we really haven't undertaken that, so I'm not in a position to say how much that would be.
Okay, it's my understanding that given a 20-mile route through a sanctuary, the fair market fee would be anywhere between $2.8 million and $7 million. Again, that fee going back to the management of that marine sanctuary because of its designated importance this government has established. My second question is around the text of the bill as written. I have concerns about some ambiguity here. Particularly, the legislation is written, let's again take my home state of Maryland. I represent the coastline of the Chesapeake Bay. Pardon me. The bill is written, I'm concerned, where it says any state or federal agency, say if a company in North Carolina had an interest in, oh my goodness.
You're reminding me to have some water.
Yes. Had an interest in undersea cables that went into federal waters off the coast of Maryland. I will get there, I promise. One more question. Say a North Carolina company has interest in undersea cables in federal waters off the coast of Maryland through a national marine sanctuary. Could a state agency in North Carolina circumvent the regulatory powers of a state agency in Maryland if we had concerns under this bill in the text as written?
No. I don't see a way for that to affect any state regulations.
Okay, I would like to see if we can find some clarity on that, Madam Chair. Just the ambiguity of that particular line is concerning to me, to make sure that we respect states' rights.
And if I can, if it would be useful to have follow-up information I can provide you, I'd be happy to do so.
I would greatly appreciate working with you on that, just to make sure that the language is as tight as possible, and again, that we are balancing here national security interests, economic interests, but the interests of protecting these national marine sanctuaries.
Yeah, and on a personal note, if I may, I wouldn't have agreed to be here if I felt that this bill would in any way erode the protections we have on the environment, particularly on the marine environment.
With my remaining time, on that note, would you agree that there is an interest if this bill were to pass, the special use permit would not be needed, but still that fair market fee piece of this for the management of those national marines, is it still important that the companies that you represent would still be paying their fair share and towards the management of these sensitive areas?
Again, I really can't speak to how the funding works, at the sanctuaries, so I would prefer not to speculate on that.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I yield my time.
Thank you, and there will be an opportunity to submit a written question if you have one, and then there's a procedure to provide responses. So you will have an opportunity to follow up. The chair now recognizes Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hageman and Ranking Member Hoyle, for holding this hearing today. I also want to thank Representative Carter for his introduction of H.R. 261. The territories are already very isolated, and we rely heavily on undersea cables to remain connected to the rest of the country and the outside world. I believe both sides of the aisle can agree we need to protect our marine environment, and I can proudly say that the United States has some of the highest standards in the world when it comes to environmental protections. Unfortunately, we sometimes prioritize preserving the bureaucratic machine over the actual communities who are supposed to benefit from these protections. My question is for you, Ms. Toombs. In your testimony, you mentioned the robust planning and permitting required to lay undersea cable in the first place, even outside of any plans to pass through a marine sanctuary. Can you please provide some more information on what is required and how safe the process is regarding protecting ocean life? If H.R. 261 were to pass, do you believe the existing safeguards are enough to ensure that the local ecology of the sanctuaries won't be negatively impacted by any hypothetical future cables?
Thank you for your question, for the mentioning the territories as well. I have permanent cables in Puerto Rico and islands like Hawaii, and resource protection there is very, very important, and the current regimes there are also very robust, even though there aren't national marine sanctuaries there. I lost my train of thought. repeat the last part of the question, please? I apologize. You're asking? Yes. Okay, I understand the question. Thank you. Yes, I would agree that it would not, there would not be, again, an erosion of protections or circumventing NOAA. I would say that what this would do is help integrate NOAA, the sanctuary component of NOAA, into the overall permitting process, because they would be essential to the consultation. I mean, they have specialized marine science or specialized expertise on their staff and with the sanctuary. So their input into the permitting process and assessing impacts would be essential.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Congresswoman Malloy for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Thane, thanks for being here, and thanks for bringing your parents. That's the most Utah thing I've seen all day. I've spent a little bit of time in your part of the state doing conservation work back when I was a soil conservationist with the NRCS, and I know how seriously the farmers in eastern Utah take their obligation to the Colorado River. And I know that a lot of times agriculture gets a bad rap when we talk about conservation, and people like to point the finger at you. But I know that agriculture has been part of the solution for a long time. The population of Utah has grown a lot in the last 200 years. Our water hasn't increased much, so thank you for being part of the solution. Thank you for traveling all the way here. I did this once. I was in your seat once, and I was really disappointed when I saw how few people were sitting up here listening. So just know that we do appreciate you being here. We're usually double booked. Most of the things I wanted to ask you have already been asked, but I just want to put a fine point on it. What's the water year looking like this year for you?
Well, south, where we are is awful dusty, and around us is fairly, I think the northern parts are doing a little better. Certainly central, southern Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, obviously California, but it's not looking so good at the moment.
And if I asked any of your neighbors what the water year is looking like, they would all know, and that's because your livelihood is really tied to water. And so you have a high incentive to try to conserve, to try to be a good steward of the resources, and to make sure that your farm lasts for another generation. And I just want to make sure that we see that and we appreciate it, and that everybody here recognizes that. Mr. Witherspoon, really quickly, I just want to say WaterSMART's a good program, and I would like to see tribes taking advantage of it. So I'm going to have my team reach out to you and to Ms. Stansbury and see if we can find a place where we can all get to some agreement on that. I don't have a question. I just want you to know that. Mr. Hipke, you're looking a little lonely and neglected over here. So I want to ask you a question. Actually, you and Ms. Toombs, the same question, because I want to use my time really efficiently. But both of you are here talking about permitting processes that are longer and more onerous than they need to be. And so my question for both of you is, do you have confidence that we could make permitting decisions that were good for the environment, good for Idahoans, good for the ocean in less time and less expensively than we're doing it now?
I'll go ahead and start off. Yes, I do. One of the things, so thank you for the question, and I'll be brief about it, is my understanding, I'm kind of the boots on the ground type of person, but far as with when we crafted this legislation, it was actually BLM that asked for the NEPA waiver, which makes sense given there's already an easement there. We're not really doing anything new. But so yes, I think there is a way. The people I've worked in the field, with these agencies have been fantastic, but they get somewhat tied around the legislation that's in place.
Thank you. I agree. I think sometimes our processes become an end unto themselves and we forget the purpose of them. Ms. Toombs?
Yes, I would agree. I do think there's a way that we can balance environmental protection, resource protection, with a predictable and reliable permitting process that could be again, shortened, more clarified, and yes, I believe it's possible.
And you were asked earlier how many applications have been denied, but I want to know if you can tell us how many applications have been delayed and made unnecessarily more expensive.
That's a good question. We're not privy to who may have submitted applications and withdrew them. What I can say is it's more the opportunities lost, applications that were never submitted because the process was really too unclear and unpredictable. And that's a hard, there's not a number for that, but it is lost opportunity.
Thank you. I just appreciate all of you being here. I know it's a sacrifice to come here and testify, but it really does help us come up with better outcomes. Mr. Thane, last question for you. Is it colder in Washington, D.C. right now or in Green River, Utah?
You know, it's about the same. I think it's a little bit more humid here, though. We got a drier cold.
It is definitely more humid here, and the cold goes through your clothes in a way it doesn't in Utah. I apologize for that. We'll get you home soon. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. I think the way to put it is oftentimes the process is the punishment, and that's what we need to change. As Rep. Malloy so accurately stated, we sometimes lose sight of what the very purpose of these processes and permitting requirements are for, and they're actually to have an end, there is an end goal, and we need to make sure that this is working correctly. The chair now recognizes Representative Carter for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. Ms. Toombs, I want to speak to you. I spoke about H.R. 261 as you did, and I just, you know, it's looking to essentially omit the additional step of acquiring a special use permit in a national marine sanctuary, but I think there are some concerns from people that it's going to cut NOAA out of the permitting process. Do you think that's the case, that by eliminating the SUP process, we eliminate NOAA from the permitting process altogether?
Thank you for your question, and also thank you for bringing the legislation here. No, the intent is not to cut NOAA out of the process. In fact, the process already has 2 different consultations with NOAA for any submarine cable project, one under the Endangered Species Act and Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the other under Magnuson-Stevens for essential fish habitat. This would, you know, NOAA for sanctuaries would be consulted, and so it just offers, it would offer another opportunity for NOAA to have an input in that process, and really it's useful for the project to get that expertise early on.
Good, good. I just want to make sure everybody understands. We're not trying to eliminate them. We value their input, and we would still have their input. We've talked about the environmental studies that are required in the permitting of a subsea cable, regardless of where they're being deployed. Can you explain very briefly the purpose of the environmental reviews?
Yes, the purpose of the environmental reviews is to help inform the agencies with permitting authority to make their decisions. So they can't make a decision until they've undergone these processes, so they understand what the consequences of their decision might be. And so that's why we conduct multiple studies, because they go to different agencies for different decisions and different recommendations.
So that's the additional information that's gained by doing the environmental reviews.
Yes.
Yeah. So what's the purpose of a SUP?
The purpose of SUP, I mean, I did not write it, but the purpose of the SUP, you know, I don't know. Well, I'm sorry, it's just that it's, yeah.
Okay,
I
thank you.
didn't
No,
mean that
great answer, great answer. Okay. Do you believe that the existing permitting process outside of a sanctuary provides adequate protection for marine habitats?
Yes, I do. As I explained, we have a number of studies, and all of them factor into decisions that the permitting agencies make.
Okay, bear with me on this one, okay? In August of 2024, NOAA issued a notice to modify the special use permit, the SUP, for commercial undersea cables, which includes a 2-year pause on the need for these projects to obtain a special use permit. While some may say that this solves this challenge, in the permitting process, we've heard concerns in our office that the process doesn't fully solve the challenge. Do you think NOAA's announcement last August fully solves this problem, or is additional action needed?
And thank you for that. Referring to the pause, what it does, and the ICC, I must say, appreciates NOAA's review or consideration of the regulations. But it also, I mean, my mantra has been uncertainty. So during that 2-year pause, there's still some uncertainty as to what the outcome would be.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your input and your expertise. And Madam Chair, again, thank you for allowing me to wave on, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. And our final questioner of today is Mr. McDowell. I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today to testify before our committee. Ms. Toombs, one theme that members of this committee have talked about a lot is the multiple use and stewardship of our nation's natural resources. And given your extensive involvement in permitting and licensing of undersea cable projects, can you talk about how these cables interact with the marine environment?
Thank you for your question. The interaction with the marine environment is really mostly during the installation phase when the cables are being installed. But when we've done our job right, and I think we do it right because we've done this a lot, there really isn't interaction with the marine environment because most of these cables are buried for the purpose of not interacting with the marine environment or with marine users, like commercial fishing.
Gotcha. You mentioned in your testimony that new technology has helped these cables avoid environmental impacts. Can you expand on the technological advancements or other best practices that have allowed for these cables to exist in a way that respects and protects our marine resources?
Yes. Some of the practices and technological changes come at different points of the cable's lifetime. Probably some of the most important parts are right in the beginning. Some of the analyses and surveys and data collection that take place so that we can put cables in places on the seabed that will be the least harmful and most protective to the cables, least harmful to the environment, and most protective to the cables at the same time. Some of this is pretty technical. It's really beyond me how some of the route engineers analyze data and come up with some of the routing that they do, but our input into it is the environmental piece of it. During installation, the installation process has become better about knowing, being more precise, I guess, about how the cables are installed and what their conditions are as they're installed. But then also more to the community level, we have a lot of best management practices that are undertaken during the installation process, especially at the shore and near shore, having to do with public safety and making sure that we try to disrupt beach use and beach goers and marine, ocean recreation as little as possible. So there's a lot of notifications and engagement with local communities, with commercial fishermen, of course, and the agencies to make sure that the processes or the installation goes as quickly as possible and as according to plan as possible.
Sure. Well, Mr. Thane, I do just want to say that I think it's pretty neat that you've got your dad here today. And your two sons are not here, is that correct? Are they back home working on the farm?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We left them home.
Well, I don't know what camera's on, but y'all get back to work. Ma'am, I yield back.
Thank you, and I thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and the members for all of your questions. Very thoughtful discussion today, and I think helpful in terms of assessing the 4 bills that we are considering and providing additional background information for us that will help us be better and do better at our jobs. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing if they are in fact received. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, January 28th, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for such responses. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.